following kind of form. You have options to believe, as we said last time. And let's begin with the option that is the one that he eventually wants. This is going to be the correct option, right? This is going to be the truth in the end of the meditation. So you've got yourself, and that's going to double as both you and your body, right? That's actually two things really there, even though there's like me, and then there's my body. And then there's going to be God, who is existing but not a body, so another existing being, but there's no duality with God. With me, there's a duality. It's kind of me kind of plus my body, right? And then there's the physical external world, right? And in the end, what he wants to say is that the physical external world is causing you to have certain perceptions, and that that's something that we're going to know to be true, and also that God, although in a way that's kind of indirect, is going to make you think of God, and we can prove God's existence, right? So that's going to be the correct account of existence, backed up by God to make it all such that we can be certain, right? That is the truth, but of course, as we said last time, knowing that something is the truth isn't, we have to know how to get to that truth, how to be certain of that truth. So that's what we're going to have at the end of the meditations. Now, right now, though, there's another possibility. Well, there's several possibilities, actually. I could multiply them all, but the most important ones are as follows. Me, where I am without body, God, and then no other body, or nobody, because God's nobody at all, right? But what's happening is that I am thinking, right, of an external world, right? And also, although I suppose I could add to this, in addition to the external world, there's going to be preserving the truths of mathematics, right? So that's kind of correct, and that's correct when God exists, right? And I exist in my body, right? All that's correct. But over here, in addition to the imagining the world, there's also this worry that I am sort of thinking 2 + 3 = 5, when in fact, that's not the case, right? Now, right now, that's just another option, and I don't know why I can go for this option rather than that option. Another option, which is, in some sense, less of an issue, because this is so much more drastic, sort of a state of being deceived, will be something like this. Me, it's not clear from this picture whether there's a soul, let's say possibly there's a soul, there's an external world, right? But even though there's an external world, and even though there's some kind of a body, right? Right? There is my mind, me, and I'm sort of dreaming of these things, right? Don't know what my body's actually like. And there's somehow the different reality that is the external world reality, right? That's somehow causing me to have, right, these illusions. And that's a godless world in which I'm in a state of having false beliefs, right? Now, what's interesting about that one is, I should say God is the person who's making me the illusions here. The external world, although it looks very different, or is very different to how I think of it, is making me cause to have ideas of bodies. Now, what's a little trickier is it seems also the case that here I'm having calls with mathematics that at least could be wrong. Why? Well, because there's nothing particularly benevolent to me about some external world, actual, making me have certain thoughts, or somehow contributing to my having certain thoughts. The causal story isn't as clear in this possibility. There's nothing in the fact of an external world that requires that my reasoning about mathematics be correct. Right? So this could be, as I said, the product of chance. Chance doesn't necessarily get you correct thinking. Therefore, I have to worry that maybe it's incorrect at the math level as well as incorrect at the level of... Now, I sort of said quickly last week, but I don't want this to be taken too seriously, that some people might think that this is the actual world, because they might think that, you know, this isn't really solid when you talk about molecules or quarks or whatever it is, right? That the world is a kind of deceiving thing. But I think that, to be honest, we could be fairer to science and say, it's not telling you that this is a deception, it's just that this is a level of generalization about objects that science wants to be a bit more precise about. That's not the same thing as deception. It's not that there isn't a blackboard there, it's just that it really is mainly made up of empty space. But strictly speaking, there is a blackboard there. That's not a falsehood. So let's just say that the normal situation of science would be that the world is, in some sense, as it appears to you. And so the scenario here is that the world isn't as it appears to you in a strong way. Right? And so it's not normal science, but a kind of a perverse version of the scientific world picture in which everything is incorrect. Now, this scenario, right, if you added a couple of little gremlin types behind the machinery, would be the matrix. But there's another name for that scenario in philosophy of mind, and I was wondering if anybody who's done philosophy of mind can tell me. There's another name for this scenario. A physical world, unlike the world you're thinking of. It doesn't actually worry so much about these cases, but technically I suppose it could get into that worry. Has anybody heard of this before? The brain in a vat. Have you heard that expression before? Brain in a vat? So that is brain in a vat. That, what people imagine in that scenario is something like a bunch of scientists manipulating with your brain and making you think that you're right now in Lexington, Virginia in 2014, when actually, you know, it's whatever, you know, 1,000 years later or something. Right? So this is sometimes called brain in a vat. It's a little limited for our purposes because for Descartes, you can worry that you don't even have a brain. He might call it the mind in a vat. But that's, you know, the idea is sometimes, and this is what I take to be what's going on in the matrix. Okay. Now, what Descartes says is that at the end of meditation 1, you don't know which of these is correct, and I can imagine some other variations. But this one goes beyond brain in a vat and matrix, because this one has no physical world whatsoever, as well as doubting mathematics. So this is the essentially deceiving God or evil God hypothesis. Right? And this is non-deceiving God, which actually means that basically everything is exactly as it should be and is as it appears, because God kind of watches over everything to make sure it's all okay. So here there's deception as well, but it's deception by something less powerful than a God. It's deception by kind of natural means. And if you take the brain in a vat version, you have some evil scientists doing it to you. If you take the matrix, you have, I suppose, evil robots doing it to you. And if you then had some version of this whereby it was neither, it just happened that way. Like a freak occurrence of nature was that a bunch of human beings got created who got deceived about things. Then you would have no intentional deceivers behind it at all. It would just be a fact of deception that wouldn't have anybody to blame. So, except, possibly, as we discussed last time, who might be to blame for your being deceived? No, yourself. You might, as you might sort of, on the basis of not enough evidence, you believe some false things. So you might think that the deception, there are people behind it, or there's just nobody behind it. It just happens. Or you are partly to blame if anybody's to blame, but in some sense, it's not that you went to make yourself be deceived, but that you just happened to be deceived because you've sort of reached a conclusion that was such that you hadn't grounds for it. So, we don't know which situation we are in. Because we don't know which situation we are in, we have to worry that nothing that we believe is true. And Descartes thinks, okay, is there any way we can rescue ourselves from this scenario? Right? Is there any way that we can start eliminating some of these skeptical possibilities, these possibilities of being deceived? And I want to say one more thing and then ask you guys a question before I go to the meditation 2. There is something at the end of Descartes when he talks about perception or sense perception more generally. Right? And I want us to look at this word perception for a second. Because it's important that in philosophy, this is something that was introduced by the philosopher Gilbert Ryle, who was a British philosopher, basically sort of middle of the 20th century, so he's been flourishing really sort of 40s and 50s in Oxford. And Gilbert Ryle talked about something which he called a success verb or term. I think that it's not just a case of verbs, but I'll be happy to talk in terms of examples today of verbs. Success verbs. Perception is not perception unless it's successful. Now, let me give you an example of words that are such that they have conditions that must be met for them to be in fact happening or true. So take persuasion. Right? Not the Jane Austen novel, but just the verb. The noun here, right? To persuade somebody. Now the point about persuasion is nobody can say that somebody's been persuaded unless what? What does persuasion imply? Esther, what does persuasion imply? If I say I persuaded you, what has to be true for that to be correct about what I just did? I persuaded you. Exactly. I convinced you. You have the belief that I was attempting to get you to have. If I said I persuaded you and you said I don't believe you, I couldn't say I persuaded you. Right? That would be incorrect. I attempted to persuade you perhaps, but I didn't persuade you. Okay. So it must be that there's somebody's been convinced, right? With the word deception, and I like this because it's relevant to what we're going to talk about next. If I say I deceived, let me see, Kara, yes. If I say that I deceived you, Kara, what would have to be true about you if I said that I deceived you? What's a condition that must be met? If I deceive you, what sort of state must you be in after I've deceived you? Well, what is it to be in a state? What do you have to be in a state of being deceived? There's at least one thing that you have to have, as it were, in your mind for you to be deceived. Well, but what's important about the belief that you have? It has to be what? False. So it has to be that deception results in a false belief. Okay? If there's no false belief, there's no deception. Right? I might attempt to deceive you, but there's no actual deception happening because there's no false belief that's been produced. So these are all examples of success verbs. Well, if I made it persuade, deceive, right? Term, I don't mind whether it's put in the... So, now perception. Well, the point that's being made by Descartes based on a number of other philosophers is that perception implies... Now, here's what it implies. It implies several things. It at least implies that I have some kind of experience of something, right? And it implies that the object of the experience exists. But it implies more than that. Why does it imply more than just the object exists and I'm having an experience of some kind? Patrick, why does it imply more than... why do they think, anyway, it implies more than just that there's an experience I'm having and that there's an existing object, right? Because let's assume if there's no existing object, then I wouldn't want to be calling it a real experience. But what else has to be true?
Well, you have to be able to perceive it.
Well, let's say I'm having what seems to be a perception of that door over there, right? So I got the experience, and let's say the door actually exists. So is that enough? Does that mean that I've got a perception? I think I'm seeing a door, as it were, and there is a door.
You have to have some belief about it, or...
Well, okay, so now I have a belief. I'm having a visual experience. What it takes to be a visual experience. So it's like, rectangular, brown. There is a brown rectangular door in the room. Therefore, is it the case that I'm having a sense perception of that door?
Yes.
Okay, so question is, does anything else have to be true? Can those two things be true and it still not be true that I'm having a sense perception? There exists a door, and I'm having a door viewing experience. Yeah, that's it.
Like a door has to be the cause of your perception?
Okay, yes, that's what Dicker, following others, have argued. It has to be that the object of the experience is actually causing you to have that experience, right? Caused by object. Now, although it's peculiar to imagine this, there was a story or a joke told. I'm still not certain as to whether it was a joke or a story, but a friend of mine who works on Descartes quoted this once, and I loved it. So there was a member of the House of Lords in Westminster who dreamt that he was either giving a speech in the House of Lords or that he was listening to a speech in the House of Lords. And he woke up, and guess what? He was in the House of Lords, and either he was giving the speech or he was listening to a speech. But the point is that he was dreaming what was actually happening. So I could be here, although I wouldn't sort of, there could be no guess. I could be here dreaming that there's a door over there, and there is a door over there. But I'm not having a sense of experience because the door over there isn't causing me to have the collection of, I suppose, colors at the very least and shapes. So that has to be causally responsible as well. So the success conditions, perception is also a success verb. There's a lot going on, right? Okay, so now we see, given the conditions that are required for being a perception, if we go back to this, we can see that here is the only case of a perception. This is not a case of a perception because what I'm imagining doesn't exist. And also, it's been caused by God, not by it. And this one is also not a perception because what I'm imagining isn't what exists. Even if there is something that existing, it's not that. Right? Now, what's peculiar, although I can't imagine this being what a useless kind of universe. Imagine the universe was exactly the way I dreamed it to be. And I was made to dream it by a physical reality. But they made me dream exactly what was there. Peculiar kind of perverse universe, but that's a possible universe too, in which case I would not be having a perception. So, here is something that people, I suppose, would allow, but it's a very perverse universe again. Imagine God made you hallucinate a universe that was exactly the correct copy of the universe. Also possible, but wouldn't be a perception, yeah?
Would that be a false belief, or is it just not perception?
Good. It's, on certain ways of putting it, your beliefs would be true. At least a certain subset.
Right.
Subsets about what exists. Your beliefs about that I'm having a perception wouldn't be true. But that there was a mountain would be true. So actually there'd be some true beliefs, but not all of them. But there'd be no perceptions. Yeah, sense perception. Yeah.
You said that the idea that a perception is caused by an object leaves us with the non-deceiving God scenario, correct?
I said that in this situation, because you could imagine a case where the world causes you to have perceptions, and there's no error, there's no sort of failure causally. It's the experience that's veridical. So you can remove God and have that. The problem with that is not that your beliefs would be false, but that you couldn't be certain of them. So it wouldn't be that there's a problem with truth or falsehood. Just like, as Nathaniel was saying, you could have a bunch of true beliefs about the world. You just couldn't be certain of them being true. And from last class, we saw that what he wants is to have certainty about how things are, not just beliefs that happen to be true. Yeah.
And the reason you can have certainty, didn't Vicar mention in Latin, first chapter, something about like if you dreamt something that was exactly how the world actually was, you had this real perception, you yourself couldn't judge the difference between the two because you wouldn't know the difference.
Right. So here's the thing. If we don't even have the dream being caused by another reality, I mean, a reality that Descartes, as I said last time, doesn't really think about much is there's me, and I'm just a mind, and I'm just dreaming, kind of on my own, not because anybody is messing with me, not even because of a machine messing with me, I'm just dreaming on my own and dreaming of the world, right? So that would be a possible scenario, right? Now, of course, it might be that it just so happens that there is an actual right there. I mean, this is a bit like the guy in the House of Lords. He's dreaming what's actually there. Nobody's making him dream that. He just is. Now, what Dicker wants to say is that if I were to say there's a mountain in front of me, as a point, that would be a true belief. My statement would be true. The proposition would be true. And if I believed it, it would be a true belief. But I would have no way, unless I proved God's existence, of knowing that that was actually happening. So what you lack here is not truth, but you lack certainty because just because that's a possibility, right, you still don't know if that's happening versus what you hope is happening, which is that there's me, and I'm a soul, but I'm in a body, and there's an actual mountain there, and the mountain is actually causing me to have that. That's what I would like to know is going on, but I don't know which of them. So, in other words, here's what's kind of a curious point about this. If you think of the dream hypothesis as making everything fake, that's only one version of the dream hypothesis. The other version of the dream hypothesis is it's exactly mimicking reality, but you would never know that you had these weirdly veridical dreams that exactly mimic reality. That's a possibility, but you would never know that you had that unless you prove all the good stuff. Right, yeah, Hope.
I'm a little confused how is it possible that, or why is it impossible that to have a physical world that exists and it influences you and causes you perception? How is it impossible for that to exist without God?
It is not possible, good. It's not possible, it's not impossible for it to exist without God. I suppose a world if we just remove that. Whereas it's exactly the physical world as we think, exactly maybe us as we think, although there's a question whether we think of us as being souls and minds or just souls and bodies or just bodies. But what Descartes says is, if the world was that, if we could sort of God-like, so to speak, look upon the world and see that there were just people and mountains, and we were now thinking of the world like that, we could never know that we were in such a world. That's his point. It wouldn't be false. It would be such that in that scenario, we would never have certainty about the way the world is. So if you asked a scientist today, put it like this, as you took in some scientist who, say, happens to not believe in any God, and you say to the scientist, does the world consist of just, people who may or may not have minds, although he doesn't want that perhaps to be sort of supernatural type things, just somehow products of the brain, right? People with brains that think and external physical world that causally impacts them through their bodies. Is that what you believe to be true? And the scientist, I'm assuming, says, yes. And I say to you, can you prove it's that versus a great big dream? What would the scientist say?
No.
Can't prove it. Cannot prove that it's not one big dream. And Descartes thinks that's not enough. We want to be able to prove that we're not having it as one big dream. Scientist isn't particularly worried. Scientist doesn't have the, concerns of the philosopher here. Philosopher, that's not enough. I want certainty that the world is not a great big dream. So it's perfectly possible. So again, this is what I said last time. In some sense, the truth of the matter about your beliefs is whether it is or isn't. That's kind of what you want to be concerned is what can you believe, what can you be certain about. So this is a quest in epistemology, as well as he's going to say some things about the makeup of the world, the reality of the world. He's interested in how can I know or be certain about anything about the world and me. Is this a hand up, Austin? Yeah.
Yeah, doesn't he also admit that there's like a trade-off of uncertainty between God and the natural world, because either like God or the great deceiver is deceiving you about the natural world, or the natural world is maybe deceiving you about an existence of God, but you can't have kind of both.
Okay, well, you could have a scenario in which there's a natural world and it's not deceiving you about anything. In other words, the world that people think is the truth. So I should even put that in. So this is a variation. This is just me and the world, and that's it. That's kind of what Hope was imagining as being, surely that's possible, right? So but the point is, once you have this possibility, or maybe if you're a little less kind of worried about God's deceiving you, once you have this possibility versus that possibility, all you need is the possibility, and right now you can't rule it out, that it's this or that, or even that it's just this. Once you have that as an actual possibility for you versus this, right? Then you are, without certainty, you're epistemologically, you're weak on this. So your beliefs could all be true, but you wouldn't know that they're true. And what you want is to know that your beliefs are true, not just that they are true. That's what you want. That's what you want. You want certainty. So he says this is the scenario they're in. Without my arguments, you are now stuck in limbo for all of your life, not having any certainty about how things are. So, this is what I said, it is a cliffhanger. You're literally in limbo now. He says it's like in a quicksand or a whirlpool or something, right? And so how do you rescue yourself from that? And this is obviously going to be some version of pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, right? That's what we're going to talk about next. But I want to see that this is the case that even if you were having perceptions, you wouldn't know that you were having perceptions versus having illusions. You just wouldn't know it. It'd be, in some sense, true that you were having them, but you wouldn't know that you were having them. And what he wants is to be able to know that you're having perceptions. Or indeed, would it turn out to be the case that you weren't having them, to know that you weren't having them. That would be fine too. But knowledge is what you want. Okay, so does that make sense now? Does anybody have any last question about the... I mean, I said I could multiply the options, but at least these options. And of course, we should add this one, although he's not particularly interested in this one because he's worried about being in this scenario. Okay? Okay, good. So now what we need to do is we need to see, okay, in all of these scenarios, even this one, which, as I said, he doesn't really want to imagine because he thinks that it would be beyond my own sort of intellectual imaginative ability to imagine the entire world, right? But even though he doesn't want to imagine that, we can imagine what's true about every single thing I drew on the board, right? Because there's one thing that never gets left out, right? There's one thing that's always there. So what is it that's Powers? Yeah?
Yeah, you're always there.
I'm always there, right? Or the person, the thinker is always there, right? So the existing thinker is always present, right? So that seems to be what we can build on here, right? We can build on the existing thinker is always present in any of these scenarios. Now, there's actually a rather funny little, well, not funny, I mean, it's intellectually amusing, but it's a kind of a cool little thought that I realized when I reread Dicker. It's in the second edition. I'm not even sure if it's in the first edition. I think he actually may have added it. I have to go and check. So we have to imagine that the scenario I gave you was, consider the following proposition. External world exists. That's one that we don't know. If we think it, it might be true, it might not be true, but who are we to know? God exists. Actually, that's one that we don't know yet either. 2 plus 3 equals 5. We don't know that one either. Why? Because we've actually introduced a very high sort of level of test. We've said, okay, imagine all-powerful deceiver. Because we're sort of sensitive about the religious people getting offended, we don't call that deceiver God. We just say all-powerful deceiver. In fact, we can go further. We can call it the demon. Okay? Because there aren't any demon worshippers here, right, who get offended. Okay. Nobody will be offended if we call the deceiver the demon. Okay, so the demon is a mere hypothesis. It's merely a device. He doesn't believe that anybody actually thinks there's a demon. It's just like in arguments, when you give the argument from the side that nobody believes. What's that called? Being what? Devil, demon. Okay, being the demon's advocate, right? Okay, so what if all this is not true? So now we move to the one that apparently is going to work. Now, I think that we can do this in 2 different ways. We can do it as an individual thought, and we can sort of try to analyze that the way that you guys are probably doing it, and then we can move into a kind of more of a formal argument. So we give it as an individual thought, it will be this. I exist. Or I think. In fact, you can give a whole bunch of them, but those are the 2 ones that that he gives as the first example, and that are the most powerful ones. Okay, so even if there's an all-powerful demon, must I suspend judgment about those things? Do I put them into the doubt group, or do I put them into the belief group? So what is his response? Into which group can I put I think and I exist? Patrick here, which I can put it in the belief group. Why can I put those into the belief group as opposed to the other ones which I have to put into the doubt for now?
Because in thinking, you can't doubt that thought exists, even if you could doubt, like if you thought some random thought, and you doubted the thought, you're thinking of doubting it.
Okay.
So then that thought exists. And so since the thought exists, something had to create it in order for it to exist, and you are the thinking being who created it.
Good. Okay. Very good. I'm gonna take all of that and say that's, in a nutshell, I believe, more or less, what he actually argues. So the way that it was put there meant that the I think was put, as it were, first as being kind of closer to the immediate thing that's going on, but then that gave you the basis for arguing that I exist, because thought requires a thinker, essentially, and therefore. Now, we're going to we're going to worry about this argument in a minute. But what I want to say is actually, I think, the next thing I want to say is kind of funny. Dicker makes this point. So I want us to be very clear with this. What we're saying is that this, right, when I think it, is both true and what was really important about what Patrick said is not just that it's true, but that what? In addition to the fact of that being true when I think it, or I think being true when I think it, with respect to knowledge, certainty, belief, so it's true and what? You just successfully arrived at not just that it's true, but that, no, yeah?
That it's certain.
That it's certain, that you know it to be true. In other words, it's not just that it's true, but that you know that it's true. Or that you're certain about it, if you want. Now that's crucial. So you get both truth and knowledge of truth. Does everybody see how you can have truth without the knowledge of the truth? But this is supposed to be this amazing case in which you get both. Again, before we attack it. Now, this is, I now want to introduce something that, as a Dicker just gives very quickly, but I think it's very funny. Could the demon make you think the following? Could the demon make you think that? Shoot. Yeah?
According to Descartes, couldn't.
According to Descartes, the demon could not make you think that.
Yeah. Or believe that.
Okay, I mean, I want to say, Dicker disagrees with you, and this is why it's interesting. Hannah has a hand up, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're the deceiver, I guess all of the philosophy that we use in this world might not even be true, and you might not even think about the fact that you exist.
So, sorry, beg your pardon. You've actually given me a scenario that's slightly different. Imagine a world in which I exist, but I don't have any thoughts. Now, Descartes doesn't actually imagine that that's possible. He says if you're existing, then you're thinking. You can't exist and not think. But could you have a universe in which you're not thinking? And there's a deceiver, except the deceiver isn't doing anything. He's there. Could that be true? Could you have a scenario in which you don't think, the deceiver doesn't bother with you, you both just kind of chill but do nothing? Is that possible? Yeah.
What about like a bacteria or a sea sponge or something that probably doesn't think?
Okay, but of course, it has no power to think as well as it doesn't think. The mind has the power to think but doesn't think. But just, can you have a dormant thinker?
But what about when you're
Sorry,
sleeping and like you're not conscious
Okay.
of the fact that you're thinking?
Good. Locke, just say, Locke says, there are lots of times when I'm not thinking. Like, for example, in a deep sleep, I'm not thinking. So some people do believe that the mind can just completely go to sleep. Descartes says, not possible. The mind never goes into pure, complete, dreamless, non-thinking, how much more can I say, non-REM, nothing's going on. Because you might think even some kind of boredom, I mean, if you think of it in terms of brains, you might think, there's some kind of, like when your phone is, on some kind of low level, there's still something going on there. It's not just off. And you can't switch off a brain, because that would be like death. Right? Or maybe you can switch off a brain and then you bring it back to life, like they think that this brain dead. But the point is, he's imagining a mind, not a brain. Because can the mind go to sort of zero activity? Descartes says no, Locke says yes, Hope says yes. Does anybody else think yes, the mind could just have no thoughts at all? Yeah? Yes?
If it did go to a point where there were no thoughts, how would we even be able to know that?
We wouldn't.
Yeah.
We're being God's eye about a universe. This is not us. We're just imagining a universe with a mind that never thinks. Can there be a universe with a mind that never thinks? Not according to Descartes, but according to Locke and some other people. Yeah.
I think you have to define what it means to exist, because I don't know how to differentiate between the mind that doesn't think and that doesn't exist.
Okay, good. Descartes would be very happy with what you just said, but Locke would not be. Locke thinks that the conditions for the existence of a mind require only the existence of a thing that has the potential to think. It doesn't require the existence of a thing that is currently thinking. Now you might think, how would I distinguish between a mind that's not currently thinking and nothing? And you'd be exactly right philosophically to worry about that problem. Descartes says, never going to happen, mind is always thinking. Because it's either dreaming, or hallucinating, or having sense perceptions, or doing math, or whatever it is. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, imagine for some people what it means to be in heaven, because there's no bodies, and there are no smells or tastes, or maybe they are, whatever. What is it? How do you figure out what it means to be existing in heaven? That's what it would be to have thinking without any kind of stimulus from outside. And figure that out as you will, that's what it would be. And then imagine you're in heaven and you sleep. Or something, I don't know. That's what we'd be talking about right now. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he only briefly mentioned it, but doesn't Descartes even entertain the thought that the moment you stop to think, you might possibly stop to exist? Like there's a possibility that happens.
I think he only says that if it's the case that God made your soul in such a way that it had a built-in stop thinking by date, that at that point your soul could just stop existing and it would stop thinking because it would stop existing, but the stop existing would come first or simultaneously. It wouldn't be that, it could at any point stop thinking. You have to worry, what if I stop thinking tonight? I'm gone. No, you don't have to worry about that one, right? So Descartes thinks it's not going to be possible for it to happen, but God could arrange it so that the soul went out of existence and stopped thinking. But even God, depending on how you read Descartes, could God create a mind that doesn't think? There's a debate about that, actually. Maybe in some possible sense, yes, but not in the sense in which God has created the actual minds. Are there any minds that don't think? So, not possible in the sort of limited sense. Okay, sorry, one last question from Hope, yeah.
Not that, but would Locke argue that if, like last night, I don't remember dreaming, but, like, obviously scientists know that we think when we're sleeping, but...
Or just, there's something going on, mental activity of some kind, whether it's thinking or not. Yeah, good.
But if I don't think that I was thinking necessarily, does that mean that for that time that I ceased to exist, or...
No, Descartes would say, you can't remember that you were thinking, but you were. Because you can't remember all your dreams, but you were. So what Descartes says is this: there's no such thing as dreamless sleep. You go, sense perception, bang, dream, bang, sense perception. So you're always working. There's no rest for the thinker at any point. But you can't remember it.
But would Locke say the same?
Locke says that there are times when, as well as not remembering, you just weren't dreaming. He thinks you can have a kind of dormant, not even autopilot, because there's not even, maybe
so
there isn't.
Would say that I existed during that time? Or
Yes, Locke has to say that you existed during that time, even though you weren't having any thoughts during that time. And Descartes says, what do you mean? That's not possible for a mind to exist and not have thoughts. It's like saying a body exists but didn't have extension. No! You can't have a body without having extension. You can't have a mind without thinking. But that would be a disagreement between them. But Locke has a consistent position if you think it's coherent to say that the mind exists, but at that... How about this? For one split second it wasn't thinking. That's all you need. And you disagree with Descartes. Yeah?
When does Locke say that happens?
Locke says it happens in, well, cases of deep sleep, perhaps momentary fainting, collapse because of too much alcohol, things like that, right? Basically when your mind does a blank of some kind. But you might not be able to remember it. You might only sandwich it between the things you remember. So you won't necessarily remember that your mind did a blank, but it can do a blank. That's what he says. Oh, yeah.
This is kind of almost tangential.
Yeah.
However, I was just thought of like a world or something where, like, I guess we have technology now, and I feel like that makes things a little different because it's like it's possible to make something that you can attach to your mind, kind of, where it switches your thoughts to stop.
No, you can't attach it to your mind.
Well, yeah, but
You attach it to your
brain.
brain. And Descartes would have this following possibility, which is crazy possibility, right? Brain dormant, mind active. Mind active in one way, brain active in another way. All those things are possible. So nothing from the... It would be like saying my finger is moving all night, therefore I'm thinking. No valid inference from your finger moving. Your brain is like basically your finger. It's no more connected to your mind in the end than your finger is. So again, today we want to say there's some activity going on in the brain. Maybe it's even mental activity. Maybe it's even thinking activity. But Descartes doesn't have to say any of that. What he has to say by his own metaphysical principles is there was thinking going on all the time. Okay, now the reason why I introduced this scenario is we now know logically possible, unless we're Descartes, that this is possible, right? I exist, I'm not thinking, the deceiver exists, he's not making me think anything, right? So now, why can't it be the case that I have a universe in which I am thinking, right? Right? I don't exist, right? And the deceiver is making me think that. Isn't that a possible universe? Yeah. Stephen.
I mean, like, Descartes is thinking, so...
I didn't ask you about Descartes. I just asked you about that. Yeah? Paul?
If it makes you think, I don't exist, that goes back to the other thing that you are thinking.
True.
And the fact that you are thinking goes to verify that you are existing because you can't be existing. You can't be thinking without existing.
Yes. So you would say about this proposition or this statement what?
The thought alone is a thought, and therefore it verifies the statement again that I think that I exist.
So, if it verifies that I exist, what can we say about this sentence or this statement or this proposition? False. But that's not a problem, right? The deceiver can make you have a false thought. Is that a problem?
Well, the fact that the deceiver is like, the deceiver needs something to deceive.
True. So therefore, this is false. He's made you have a false thought. That's
But it's still a thought.
still a thought. Yeah.
You can, like, didn't Descartes assume some kind of rationality, implying that you can actually be certain of that or believe that, even though you might have a thought?
That is another level of. That's why I'm saying Dicker's little thing is interesting here, because what Dicker wants to say is, it's not clear what it would be like to be me at this point in time. It's not clear what it would be like for me to have that sort of a thought. But he says the argument is not that the deceiver can't make you think that. That is not the argument. It doesn't start from the impossibility of the deceiver making you think I don't exist. That's not where you start from. We're lucky, apparently, because none of us have this thought. None of you actually think I don't think, well, no, of course, maybe in some very depressed moment, I don't exist. You might think there's some level at which you're saying that, but it's not literally what you mean, that there's no you there. What you mean is something like, the you I used to know isn't here anymore, or some kind of variation on that. But the point is, we don't have to worry about the power of the demon to make us think that. We don't have to worry about that possibility. Because it's just a possibility. Right? What we have is something better than a possibility. What's better than a possibility? Always. Actually, no. A possibility is merely metaphysical. What's metaphysically better than a possible lunch? Lunch. An actual lunch. That's always better than a possible lunch, right? We're going to see how God, if only God is possible, is going to be a lot worse than God is, not as good as God is actual, right? So, one point that I'll just, because I'll come back to this later on in another context, right? Actual and possible. Okay? Possible is the weaker. Something that's possible might be existing or might be true, depending on whether it's about what exists or whether it's about truth or falsehood, right? Possible is always weaker than actual. Right? Actual is always stronger, right? Now, what's interesting is, since actual is always stronger than possible, since to be actual is always more than being possible, if anything is actual, what can we infer about it? That it's possible. So anything that's actual is possible. So, a couple of people went to the moon. Actual. Is it possible to go to the moon? You betcha. At least, again, under those conditions, maybe we'll destroy the moon. Create so much radioactive waste right us on the moon that it becomes too dangerous. But is it possible? Yes. Why? Because it's actual, right? So this world that we live in, is this world actual? Well, depending on what we get to at the end of the notations, yes. Is a world possible? Yes, because it's an actual world, right? So, when I asked about this scenario, this is a possible world, it seems. Although I'm going to reserve, Clara has a worry in the end, which I think we'll come back to, about the coherence of a thinker who thinks this. Is it a coherent thought to have? But what's interesting is, if there's a problem with having this thought, it's something about the internal problem of putting these thoughts together with your mind. It's something like some kind of contradiction. So we might worry that that's actually a contradiction, and so therefore the deceiver can't make you think a contradiction. But I'm going to say I'm open to the possibility that I have a contradiction that has been put into my mind by the deceiver. I'm open to that as a possibility, but I agree that there's something funny about that thought. But that's possible. This world is possible. Maybe, unless you're Locke or Pope or this world is possible too. But we don't have to worry about that because we've got the actual world. And the actual world, therefore, is always possible. And what is it that I'm thinking in the actual world? This. So in the actual world, there's me, right? And there's my thought, which is, actually, that should really be, I am thinking. I don't think we need to worry too much about that. I think or I'm thinking, right? That's what's happening in the actual world. And now here's the point. What's the deceiver to do about that? he can't do nothing. I'm actually right now having that thought. If the deceiver was the source of it, well, it would be true. And if the deceiver was somehow not the source of it, it'd be true. So it doesn't matter. It's true whether I'm the victim of deception or not. That can't be a deception. If I have that thought, that is true, and I know it's true. The reason for doubting it can't be true anymore. Can't exist anymore. This is still doubtful, right? Because I could be thinking and there could be no external world. This is doubtful. There could be no God, and I could be thinking. This, it seems, is also doubtful. I could be thinking, and that might be false. But what can't be false is that when I think that I'm not thinking. That can't be false. So if you start from the positive and you work from that, it turns out that has to be true according to Descartes. But you could imagine this, and you're just lucky, or maybe there's some internal problem with thinking that. So the philosopher who tried to say that this was kind of the flip side of this, that this was true and this was never going to be true, was almost trying to say that it's not about statements being true, it's about kind of an action. Like, to actually think I don't exist is some kind of performative contradiction, as they said. It's a performance. So that's a performative contradiction. And maybe even I cannot, as it were, consciously do a performative contradiction. I can't say, it's a bit like, saying, somebody says, are you asleep? Yes. If you answer yes that you're asleep, then you're not asleep, right? Unless somehow weirdly you're answering yes in your dreams, and coincidentally in response to that. So you can see how that might be. But the point is, according to some people, this can't be taught. And only this can be taught. I'm not saying that that's what we have to say here. How about this? I don't exist, but if it was something I don't think, again, I think it is possible to imagine a world in which the demon makes you think, I don't think. That's a possible world. It would be false. You would be thinking, but he could make you think that you're not thinking even though you are, if that's somehow a coherent thought. But we don't have to worry about that, because we know you are already thinking that you do think, and therefore you are going to think that you do exist. So, does everybody see the difference between those two? Because that's actually, I said, that's a rather interesting point that Descartes raises. And it's not even clear whether Descartes appreciated that distinction, but Descartes gives him the benefit of the doubt and says, yes, he did. And so Descartes says, think about the case of the one that's true, and we don't have to worry about it. And that's that one. So, does anybody, right now before we get to the challenge, does anybody think, even on the grounds I've just given, actually, I suppose that anticipates the challenge, but without going into the Descartes challenge, I suppose it is, or the Bertrand Russell challenge, does anybody worry about this right now? Well, I guess, does anybody worry that you could think that and it would be false? Yeah.
Yes, that still relies on law of non-contradiction.
This one does.
Yeah.
Now that's why I've said there are some questions as to whether it is an inference or just a single kind of proposition. So do you think that there's my worry is, here's what I think you can't maybe, here's the sort of concern. Law of contradiction seems to imply, or law of non-contradiction, I should say, seems to imply two things. And this seems to be just one thing. So that's why I'm wondering whether we can even say it is possibly victim, or kind of, is the law of non-contradiction requires its truth, or that in some sense the law of contradiction deals with a more complex thought than the thought just I think.
But
Yeah.
he's making a, I guess, analytical a priori statement here.
Yes,
Saying
that would be one way to put it.
Then he denies that like 1 + 1 is 2, even though that, I guess, that's
Right.
like a definition.
Okay, good. So if you were to look at one that's kind of closer to the bone here, right? 2 + 2, or 2 = 2.
Yeah.
You might think, well, if I could go wrong with that, does he say I can go wrong with that?
Yeah.
If he says I can go wrong with that, then why can't I go wrong with this one? Right, that's, I think, good. So that is, I do think, a worry that we could have even about something as basic as just I think. We might worry if we could go wrong here, could we go wrong here? Now here's why he thinks this isn't a worry. But I'm not saying that he's going to, you may not be persuaded. He thinks that I can't doubt this while I'm having it. You actually can't think that to be false while thinking it. All you can think is, it seems true to me, I can't imagine it being false, but there's some sort of outside possibility of a deceiver who is messing with my mind about that. And he says, in this one, it's like 2 = 2. I can't imagine it being false, and if I think of a deceiver who's out there trying to make it the case that that doesn't damage it. That's his claim.
I think that just like pushes it one step back.
Right.
So,
I agree that we can now say, really, has he got kind of the certainty that he needs? And here is the counter argument that Dicker suggests, which is Descartes may have gone too far in worrying about things like 2 = 2. So far down that rabbit hole that he's unable to get himself back. Now, I think that we'll see an attempt later on to say something like the following. It may not be all the way as strong as a proof that's sort of non-question begging, but at least it seems to be the case that it is unchallengeable by any kind of coherent objection. And that's about the strongest thing that we can say. So I am going to come back to the worry that maybe even that is in some sense, even if it's true, can I really, bootstrapping, know that it's true? I'm going to come back to that worry in the end. But I want to look at a slightly weaker worry than what we just gave as a worry. Okay, so I'm going to rub out this part and I'm going to say, look, we've got another kind of worry here, which I think is interesting. And the worry that I think is interesting is not the worry that I'm sort of, ultimately relying upon some kind of self-evidence. The worry is in the I think or I exist part. The worry is the I. Strictly speaking, what you're aware of, if you're aware of this when you say it, is the thinking part. Right? That's what you are confident of and should be confident of, unless you even worry about that. But the I is a worrying part of this thing. Because I imports, at the very minimum, a thinker, this thinker, me the thinker. And now that looks like, especially if it's I exist, that looks a bit worrying because if I say that's kind of me, well, there's something, it seems, here about, if I talk about me, and I don't qualify that yet, what's true? If I said, I went to the, what do I imply if I start saying, I went to the, let me see, Ava, what do I imply? If I say, I went to the store yesterday, what can you infer from I went to the store? That you exist. So it seems like I exist, and I exist. That seems to be, I'm sort of begging the question. I can bring myself into existence, and then I say about myself that I exist. If I just start a sentence as I seem to be already granting myself existence. So there's the worry that maybe that, and even with I think, there's the worry that I have brought myself into existence. Therefore, that's illegitimate. Because you don't yet know until you finish the sentence or the assertion that you exist. So does everybody see the slight worry there? Right? It seems to be that you've gone too far already. Yeah?
But doesn't he address this concern when he's like trying to define what exactly I is? And
Somewhat. So at least the following is true. He does not mean when I say I went to the store, right, like Ava said, he doesn't mean the physical body that is me. So it's not the body. He agrees that at this stage in meditation he's not talking about a body. So you might say, well, I'm just talking about the mind here, or the soul. But again, that's still a lot, right? So me, this mind, went to, well, then you've got a mind thing that you're positing and then saying that it thinks or it exists. So even if the I is restricted to mind, still the problem is you've got the existing thing invoked before you finish the statement. So in order to either get around that or improve upon that or to correct Descartes, people who have written about him have said he should drop the I and just talk about, now what's the simplest thing if you don't posit the I? Right? Well, if I wanted to say thinking, and I didn't even want to imply not just me the thinker, but any thinker, right? What would be the shorthand, the kind of correct, being very careful thing to say? Yeah.
Like thinking occurs.
Thinking occurs, thinking exists, thinking happens. That's fine. Because you haven't posited anything more than what you can, as it were, confidently assert and maybe it's got the word that we talked about, but at least it's not got the other word that we just introduced. That it's not begging the question. Okay, existing, what would be the shorthand for that one? Will, what would be the shorthand for I exist? You're going to sort of eliminate the first personal component.
I feel like you just say the same thing, just existence occurs or existence.
Well, existence occurs might be even weaker than what you're entitled to, but I don't know, because existence for some people is not a mere activity. It implies,
That people exist?
or, well, what's weaker than entire people? What's the simplest thing? Even simpler than mind. Things exist, right? Something. If I had the thought something exists, can that be incorrect? Now, according to Descartes, that cannot be false. If I say something exists, that cannot be false. Because what, at a minimum, exists if I say something exists? Your thoughts, well, actually, more than the thing that has thoughts. So, the mind. Now, here is the part that I think Dicker went into in some detail. We might think that it's an extra step to say that because thinking occurs, something exists. We might think there's no legitimate move here, because we might think you can have thoughts and no mind. Right? That's at least one thought. And Descartes is pretty confident that if there's at least one thought, there's at least a mind having it. This is because Descartes has the view that thought is a property, or actually, he really wants to say it's an attribute because it's the principal attribute, because it's that not just any old property, but it's actually the one that's essential to mind. So it's not just any old thought, but any old property, but the one that is essential to it, most important, makes it what it is. But this is a substance. Right? And even if substances, according to Descartes, must have their principal attribute, always. Strictly speaking, there's still a distinction between them. Thought relies upon mind. So mind comes, as it were, in the order of ontology, the order of existence. Mind comes first. And thoughts are dependent upon mind. So that's what he eventually believes and argues for. But initially in meditation too, it seems it's illegitimate to say, because there's a thought, there must be a mind. And so Descartes worries that all that Descartes can get as a truth at this point in meditation is not that I exist, or that this mind exists. He has to have something weaker than that a mind exists. So what's weaker than that the mind exists, that a substance exists? What's weaker than that? Yeah, Josh. What's weaker than a mind exists?
Well, what do you mean by like weaker statement than a mind exists?
Yeah, I have less commitment to the existence of things in the world if I say this thing exists as opposed to if I say a mind exists. Yes. So, and what I thought is an example of a what?
Thinking.
It's an example of a property. So all you need to say, actually I should add property, maybe that's, no, I said substance property, okay, I'm so consistent. If you just assert the existence of a property, now you may think, well, it's not a property unless there's a substance to have it. So maybe the word property is not going to be applicable if there's only properties and no substances. That's another philosophical debate. We don't have to have that now. So a property, we'll just be able to use it now without a substance, or at least without the certainty of a substance. That's even more minimal commitment-wise, right? Because remember, just as actuality is greater than possibility, substance is always greater than property. So if you have to choose the minimum amount to commit to, you can commit to the property. So now we're going to say, okay, what Descartes really can be confident about is a thought exists, or a thought is occurring. And he says, okay, even if there's an evil demon, it can't be wrong that a thought is occurring. And so even if you were to say to Descartes, you went way too far there, hold your horses, all you can say is that, he could still say, well, okay, but that's impervious to the demon. The demon, if I say that, now I may never say it, or think it, or, I may never actually come up with a rather complex statement and proposition that thought exists. But if I ever do come up with it, and guess what, I've come up with it, then it turns out to be the case that that's true, always. And the demon can do nothing about it. And how do we know it's possible? Because it's actual, because we've all had that thought, Descartes having the thought right now. So even if you are the only human being, whatever that means now, because you're not yet a body, in the entire world, and all of this is not happening, and it's just your mind and no other human mind at least, maybe a deceive or a demon mind, but no other human mind, or even actually, to be honest, although he doesn't like it, that world in which there's just you, right? Or maybe I rubbed it off, did I? Yeah, well, there's just you and nothing else. Yeah, I think I rubbed it off. So, if you were the only existing thing in the entire universe and there wasn't even a demon, and you were worrying, was there a demon, or the two of us or just me, right? Actually, you think with that, it would still be true. Except that would be now rewritten as, or just thought occurs. Maybe that's even less committed. Thought occurs, right? Or there is a thought. That's true. Now, what we know in philosophy is in all things, if you have one successful item, that means an infinite amount. Right? Well, getting just one thought that you can be certain of is infinitely more than zero. So now, Descartes thinks he can build on that one. And we'll see how he does. But I want to go back to this worry. Can we can we be worried about this one in the way that I asked we could be worried about 2 plus 2 equals 2, or the very basic rule? Can we say, well, it could be the case that even that's false because it relies upon something very, very, very basic or primitive. And even if we would say this is self-evident, can't be doubted, no matter how much you try to doubt thinking is occurring, you can't doubt that thinking is occurring because you'd be thinking to doubt that thinking is occurring, and therefore it would be the case that it would. So, right, you know that stuff. If that is something that we have as rock bottom, can we still worry, not that it's false, but that we can't be certain of its being true? Can you worry about that? Can you worry about a thought is occurring? Okay, it seems phenomenologically you just can't. You can't get into the mindset of, you could say, oh, is it kind of in some way that I can't imagine, is it false? Well, but that's not very good as a reason for doubting, right? So my own view on this is, if you think that you can still say this might be false even though I don't know how, then you've basically entered a realm in which you can just doubt things by just being kind of contrary. But you haven't given a reason to anybody to doubt it. And I think if Descartes thinks you can go that far, he's in trouble. And so I think he shouldn't say that you should go that far. And so he should stick to his original claim, which was something like, I could worry in the abstract that a demon could mess this up. But when I think concretely about this thought and the demon, I shouldn't be able to think the demon can mess this up. And if I do think the demon can mess this up, I am really now giving up coherence. So I think he shouldn't say this. So I think he should claim that he got as much as he wants with that. But there is the difference between that versus I think. I think there is a difference there. So with this, maybe he can build the rest of his meditations, the 3 through 6. Okay, so that's as much as I wanted to get done for Tuesday. And I will read what you gave me, or what you wrote for me. On Thursday, I want to look at some of the other things he says. More things about the mind, more things about thinking, more things about thinking versus the substance, right? But we've done a little bit already about that. And then I want to look at some ways of putting this in the form of formal arguments, having read what you've written for me. And we'll do a bit of argumentation on Thursday. Okay, good stuff. So if you have your written assignment, just, I suppose, leave it at the end of the row of the seats, whichever seat you end up. So give it to the person beside you, or even you could split in the middle, but at least have it be on one or other of the two ends of your seats there.